So the Supreme Court just issued a major 6-3 ruling in favor of the state of Alabama in one of the most important election law battles that's going on in the country. In this emergency order, not only did the Supreme Court restore Alabama's map, but it also issued an opinion saying that Alabama is likely to win this case altogether. And if that wasn't enough, the court directly criticized the lower court and the lower court judges for failing to follow its recent precedent and improperly interfering with ongoing elections. This is a major development not just for the state of Alabama, but for the future of Voting Rights Act litigation across the country, and also potentially congressional elections across the country as well. So let's break down what just happened with this new Supreme Court order. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. You can also hit the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always trying to expand upon their benefits to give you as much as possible as a member. So if you're interested, if you want to check them out, you can do so using the link down below. And for a limited time until the end of July, you can use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR to get $50 off of your individual sign-up fee or $25 off the family fee. But again, that's going to be a limited time offer and it's going to end at the end of July. So if you've been following this case, you know that the Supreme Court recently issued a major ruling in a case called Louisiana versus Calais. That ruling significantly changed how federal courts are supposed to analyze Voting Rights Act Section 2 vote dilution claims. Among other things, the court emphasized that lower courts must separate race from politics and must account for legitimate state interests and traditional districting principles when evaluating congressional maps. Now, following that ruling by the Supreme Court vacated some prior rulings against Alabama and sent the case back down for the lower court to reconsider the case in light of that new Calais framework. But when the lower court reconsidered this Alabama case, it once again ruled against the state of Alabama and its congressional map. The district court blocked Alabama's 2023 congressional map and ordered the state to continue using the court-ordered special map that had been used during the 2024 elections and also recently during the 2026 primaries. That ruling immediately triggered another emergency appeal up to the Supreme Court because Alabama wanted that lower court ruling to be blocked. And now, just late last night, the Supreme Court acted on this case. Again, last night, the court granted Alabama's emergency application and stayed the district court's injunction while this case is pending. In practical terms, that means that Alabama's 2023 congressional map is once again the map that will govern Alabama's upcoming elections while this litigation continues. And what makes this new ruling so significant is the court's reasoning and what they said in this opinion. The Supreme Court expressly stated that Alabama has shown it is likely to succeed on the merits of both of its claims. Now, that is huge, and that's a significant statement about the potential outcome of this case. When the court says that the party here is likely to succeed on the merits, it is effectively telling us how it currently views this whole preliminary injunction stage of this case and some of these stay requests, and how ultimately it believes that the resolution of this case may play out based on how this is procedurally being presented. The Supreme Court then went on to directly criticize several aspects of this lower court ruling. First, the court said that the district court failed to honor the presumption of legislative good faith. So according to the majority, the lower court improperly treated Alabama's disagreement with prior remedial orders as evidence of discriminatory intent. The court specifically here cited its prior precedent, emphasizing that legislators are entitled to a presumption of good faith when enacting maps. Second, the Supreme Court said that the lower court failed to properly apply the framework announced in that Calais ruling. Under Calais, plaintiffs must show that their alternative map performs just as well as the state's map with respect to all legitimate districting objectives. So according to the Supreme Court, that did not happen here at the lower court level. The Supreme Court specifically pointed to Alabama's interest in preserving the Gulf Coast communities that were of interest to them, and then also avoiding incumbent pairings in certain districts. The Supreme Court concluded that the lower court found a violation even though the challenger's proposed map did not perform as well as Alabama's map with respect to those legitimate objectives. Third, the Supreme Court criticized the lower court's analysis of racially polarized voting. The majority stated that the Calais decision made clear that the differences in voting patterns alone are not enough, and that courts must carefully distinguish race from partisan affiliation. So according to the Supreme Court, the lower court failed to follow instructions in this case, and they did not actually follow Supreme Court precedent. The Supreme Court also embraced one of Alabama's biggest arguments in this challenge, which was the Purcell Doctrine. The Supreme Court reiterated that federal courts generally should not alter election rules on the eve of elections. According to the majority of the Supreme Court, the district court improperly inserted itself into Alabama's ongoing election process and blocked the state from using maps chosen by its elected representatives. The Supreme Court specifically rejected the lower court's reasoning that using the court-drawn map would simplify and actually be more convenient. The Supreme Court stated that while federal courts should be cautious about making last-minute election changes, states themselves are free to decide whether such changes are in their actual own interests. And that language is another significant victory for Alabama and also other cases going forward. Now, of course, this ruling was not unanimous. It was 6-3. So there was a block of 3 dissenters, the liberal Justice Sotomayor, who wrote the dissent, who was then joined by Kagan and Jackson. The dissent argued that the Supreme Court here is creating chaos by restoring Alabama's map and forcing election officials to reassign hundreds of thousands of voters on short notice. The dissent also accused Alabama of intentionally resisting prior court orders and argued that the state should not be rewarded for what the dissent described as some sort of gamemanship. According to the dissent here, the court-drawn map had already been used successfully in prior elections and should have remained in place while this litigation moved forward. So the split within the court remains very significant. Again, this was not unanimous. You had a block of the majority, I believe 6 justices against the 3 dissenters who were the liberal justices who wanted to decide against Alabama. But at the end of the day, Alabama got the relief that they were seeking. And now this case is going to move forward to the next phase. Alabama will continue pursuing Supreme Court review of this case on the merits potentially. The challengers will continue defending the lower court's rulings, but for now, the immediate practical consequences is very straightforward. Alabama's 2023 congressional map has been restored and will be used going forward, at least while this case is still pending. The lower court's injunction has been blocked, and the Supreme Court has signaled that Alabama is likely to prevail on the merits of this case. Now, that does not guarantee a final victory, but it is about as strong of a signal as Alabama could have hoped for, especially at this stage of litigation. And I want to mention this new ruling matters because this case is much more than just what's going on in Alabama. The Supreme Court's recent Calais decision already reshaped Voting Rights Act litigation, and now the court appears actually prepared to actively police how lower courts apply that ruling. The outcome could affect redistricting battles nationwide and help to determine how courts evaluate the relationship between race, politics, and these types of districting ongoing disputes. It could also have major political consequences because congressional maps directly impact representation in the House of Representatives and potentially also the balance of Congress. So that is the latest major update in this Alabama election/redistricting battle. The Supreme Court has now granted Alabama's emergency application, restored Alabama's 2023 congressional map, and they stated that Alabama is likely to succeed on the merits of their claims. The Supreme Court also directly criticized the lower court's application of Calais, its treatment of legislative intent, and its handling of election-related concerns. So this is a significant win for Alabama and a potentially important signal about where the Supreme Court may ultimately be heading when this case returns on the merits. So as more developments happen, as this unravels more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.